Welcome to Higher Ed, ADL's brand new podcast where once a month we will sit down with Jewish students to uncover the truth about what's going on college campuses. Each episode, we will bring you firsthand stories of Jewish joy, Jewish leadership, and Jewish pride, highlighting students who are confronting hate head-on. I'm your host, Luda Saharov, and I'm a proud Jew and Zionist. It is so important for us to find solidarity in our experiences of anti-Semitism. And if there's one thing you should know about me, as much as I love sharing our stories, what I love most is taking action. I spent years on the front lines, working as an activist, as a leader in the Jewish campus community, and as student body president, pushing back against the rising tide of hate and ensuring Jews are safe on campus. The day after my graduation, I hopped on a flight to Washington, D.C. and joined ADL, where I have continued my work combating all forms of hate. My story is just one of many. Post-October 7th, all of our worlds got turned upside down, and now more than ever, it's time to have this conversation out in the open. Higher Ed is about student stories, the good, the bad, and the hopeful. We'll share the struggles and the moments of light, the victories, and the resilience that keeps Jewish students going. Their stories and their own words. The High and Higher Ed is exactly what students embody: strength, survival, and an unshakable commitment to who they are. In this podcast, you'll hear from students who refuse to be silenced. Because Jewish students aren't just surviving on campus, they're standing up, speaking out, and shaping the future. Listen closely. This is all of our fight, and these are their stories. Welcome to Higher Ed Podcast. Today we're going to be speaking to Ben Marcus, who's a junior at Brown University. Ben, welcome to Higher Ed.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luda, for having me on this podcast today.
I'm so excited to have you. This is the highlight of my week. So Ben, for our listeners, who is Ben? What is your Jewish journey?
Yeah, so I grew up in a traditional Jewish house. My dad grew up, as some would coin, conservadox, and my mom grew up in a traditional conservative home. And growing up, I was raised the same way for the most part. I went to Jewish day school, phenomenal Jewish education. But it wasn't until really around the time of my bar mitzvah where we really started getting serious about our Judaism as a family. We started walking to shul. We started, keeping strictly kosher all the time. And it really led me and my family as a whole on a path to where I am now, wearing a kippah and tzitzit around my secular university. After high school, I went to Esha Torah, and I had a life-changing experience there for a year where I really learned about my heritage, learned about, how to learn Talmud, which is, an essential piece of Judaism, and to really bring that notion that as a people, we're a light to all nations.
So what brought you to Brown University? Why Brown University?
So why Brown? That's a great question. Obviously, Brown offers a lot of academic opportunities. I've had a great education here. I'm a religious Jew, and for religious Jewish life, Brown really has phenomenal infrastructure compared to other universities around the country. It's phenomenal kosher food. There's a daily minyan, great staff. Hillel Chabad love each other. So there's really nothing to complain about here in terms of infrastructure of Jewish community.
And I heard you played a role in bringing the first minyan to campus. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've always grown up in small Jewish communities. So starting a daily minyan on campus wasn't something new for me, as I did the same in high school and in my local community with my family. So luckily I have my brother here at Brown also. He's a sophomore, and together we really made this happen, and it's great. We're really growing something special here.
Coming from rural Oregon, that is so relatable, and I wish we would have had a minyan at University of Oregon, so good for you. What is your major? What do you study at Brown?
Yeah, so I'm studying biology and economics. It's a very Brown combo with our open curriculum. There's no core, so you get to really explore.
And have you always been into biology and science, or did you figure that out after coming to Brown?
Yeah, I've always loved the biological sciences. Actually, I grew up very into fishing. I still am. So just from as a kid, that was just what I was interested in, and along the way, I've picked up an interest in economics, learning about markets, global markets, and I've had the opportunity to explore it here at Brown.
Amazing. So I want to dive right into your experience with the advisory committee on university resources and management. I think for the purpose of this, let's just call it the advisory committee.
Perfect.
So what exactly is this advisory committee?
Yeah, so the advisory committee, right? At Brown loves its acronym, so we call it ACRM here. In essence, it's a ethics and morals committee for university resources management. So it was something I was really interested in, right, pre-October 7th, before any encampments on campus. I wanted to know what the inner workings of the university were. So there was an opening on the committee. I applied and I got it, and life was good.
Right. And what exactly motivated you to join? Why this over the plethora of other activities you could have joined at Brown?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually last summer I worked at a commodities company, and the advisory committee was reviewing a petition about disassociating from fossil fuels. So I thought that would be something really interesting for me to learn more about from a moral and ethical sense, from the investment side that the university had, in preparation for my summer internship.
And did your kind of Jewish identity or Israel have any role in your application to this committee?
Zero.
And what was the role of a student? Did you have voting power, or did you just give your perspective?
Yeah, so the advisory board as a whole gives an ultimate recommendation to the president's office on what the president should do, depending on the situation. So, as a committee made up of 11 to 12 people, depending on the time, undergrad student's voice. There are two undergraduate positions on the committee. Really have a large impact in what the president ends up doing. Historically, the president has listened to the advisory committee recommendations, with the real exception of one time in 2019 when the committee voted in favor of divestment from Israel and the president vetoed it.
Wow. So just to give our listeners some perspective, what kind of issues was the committee concerned with prior to October 7th?
Yeah, so some popular ones were disassociating from fossil fuels, nicotine companies.
So you're on this committee. You're probably learning so much. It's such an amazing opportunity to have a voice on how millions of dollars are invested by the university. And then October 7th happens. How did the atmosphere change? What was the committee like after October 7th?
Yeah, absolutely. So after October 7th, specifically when the encampments started popping up on universities around the country, everyone on the committee really felt it coming that we're about to have another Israel petition that we're going to have to review. And at the time, we were all under the assumption that, a petition will be submitted and we'll review it whenever we finish the previous one.
Could you walk us through what exactly happened? What was going on campus at that time?
Yeah, so Brown took a very intuitive approach to ending the encampments here, but the president cut a deal with the encampers for them to end the encampment in exchange for the committee to vote on divestment from Israel.
So just to backpedal a little bit, that's very interesting. I know at this time, universities are having encampments, and Brown was one of the first ones to settle with the encampment. Personally, what was your view on the decision to settle and to have them, this committee, hear their proposal? Do you think that was a fair settlement or a wise thing for the university to do?
Yeah, I think in the president's mind, I could definitely see it being justified to have this as a symbolic process to say, here, look, you're getting what you want, but ultimately knowing that it would be shut down. In my mind, personally, the logic makes sense to me, but I was bothered because why give in to this moral rot in the first place that was going on our campus? When it comes to taking a moral stance, which this was, there's a right and a wrong. So I think this was an opportunity for the university to take a really strong moral stance and say we're not making a deal with these people. Instead, they did.
So the university, this agrees to have ACERM, this committee, hear their proposal for BDS, for divestment from Israel. What happens next?
Yeah. So we thought we were about to take a look at the proposal right away, but it turns out the submitting party didn't have a proposal ready to submit when the encampment ended. So we finished the remainder of the semester talking about fossil fuels, which was the petition we were reviewing at the time. And then I got an email the first week of July from an undergraduate student who was a new member of the undergraduate student body. And the student wrote me an email saying that I was removed from the committee. And this is like the week that the proposal was supposed to be submitted. So one Google search of his name, I see a beautiful article talking about how this person is pro-divestment and is anti-Israel. So natural instinct, I forwarded it right over to the president's office. And yeah, that's when the ball started tumbling down the hill at that point.
So this student who's on the student government is telling you, conveniently close to this vote, that you are being removed from the committee.
Yes.
How much power do these students actually have? Were you actually removed from the committee then? Do you follow his instructions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the student did not have the jurisdiction to remove me. So I emailed the president's office, and the president, I'm actually a big fan of our president, Christina Paxton. She's a great ally and a phenomenal thinker. But from her viewpoint, she said, due to potential scrutiny on her part, she can't influence the membership of the committee. Therefore, she pawned me off to the vice president. The vice president then didn't respond to me for a little while. And in this meantime that I was waiting around, the student who removed me actually reopened the applications for my position. So now I'm in this limbo state, waiting for the vice president to get back to me over the July 4th long weekend. So I'm like, whoa, what am I supposed to do?
Did the student give any reason or justification for them removing you, or did they say, we're just removing you?
So the student said, due to technical difficulties or misunderstandings with the initial appointment, that he was given the power to remove me. Now, funny enough, I finally heard back from the vice president right after the applications were opened a day before they closed. And the vice president, he wrote a very interesting line to me, and I think it's worth reading. He said, I could certainly consider reapplying for the position, but he said, I expect you would need to address whether you have a conflict of interest. It's reasonable to expect that your leadership role in Brown Students for Israel may pose a potential conflict with regard to the divestment proposal. And while you may not think you would need to recuse yourself from it, you might have to, right? Implied. So to me, I was like, where is he getting this idea from? I thought I was removed on a technicality, which is what the first student was claiming. Now the vice president of the university is implying that there might be something going on here with my leadership role in Brown Students for Israel, which at the time I didn't really have a role. Now I'm happy to say I'm the co-president of Brown Students for Israel, and we're doing really well. But at the time, I'm like, what's going on here?
So what are you thinking at that time? How do you perceive this whole situation to be? And please be fully honest about how you felt.
Yeah, I was really upset because I enjoyed my time on the committee. There are 2 undergraduate positions, 1 graduate position, a bunch of faculty and alumni. So it was a great learning experience for me being on the committee in general. And I was really bothered because the only thing I could think of why I'm being implicated to have a potential conflict of interest here is I walk around wearing a yarmulke and tzitzit. Like, he's taking a direct stab at my Jewish identity here, and I was really bothered.
Wow.
And at the time, I figured the applications had already been closed for my position. What am I to do? So my plea was to delay the appointment process, or at least naming the new person on the committee, until properly investigated, right? And I was completely neglected, which I thought it was a pretty reasonable request to say, hey, why don't we put a pause on this and figure out what's going on? Now, funny enough, right, all of this was being thrown around at the time that I might have a potential conflict of interest. But the hypocrisy was crazy. Not only did the student remove me, openly wrote an op-ed about how he's pro-divestment, and he appointed this girl who also openly wrote op-eds about how she's so anti-Israel. And funny enough, the grad student on the committee also wrote op-eds about how he's anti-Israel and pro-divestment. I was the only one that had to deal with the consequences.
So I'm going to ask you a very obvious question. So you're saying that you joined this committee in the first place with zero motivations for it to be connected to your Jewish identity or your connection to Israel. At the time, you don't hold any leadership positions in the Jewish or pro-Israel community. So those things in mind, what was the reason that you would have a conflict of interest?
You couldn't look my name up and say, oh, this person is Brown Students for Israel or involved with the Orthodox community, right? Except for Minyan. But if you want to say I have a conflict of interest for starting a daily Minyan at Brown, then I hate to break it to you, but you're anti-Semitic.
But why do you think they removed you? Why did you have a conflict of interest?
Yeah, so the only thing that was reasonable to me, which at first sounded like conspiracy theory, until my replacement was named, was this person removed me because he thought I would be a threat to their divestment proposal.
Because
I'm Jewish.
Because you're Jewish. So you are in a very unique situation. I want to say other students have found themselves in this situation, but I think this is very unique. But what's not unique, I think, is that you were removed from a position because of your Jewish identity, because of your perceived connection to Israel. Do you, at this point, know who at the university to report this to get a meaningful response?
Yeah, so no one, whether it was the president, the vice president, the senior staffer of the committee that I was in touch with, no one even recommended. No one recommended filing any kind of formal complaint or investigation. And it wasn't until weeks later that it occurred to me, like, you know what? Let me see if they have some kind of portal or something form that I could fill out. So that once my replacement was named, I filed a formal complaint with the university, in which you're supposed to hear back in 60 days. And I only heard back in January. So July to January, is not very responsive, especially when it comes to anti-Semitism. And funny enough, Brown actually admitted to not taking enough action on instances of anti-Semitism last spring and this fall, actually. And yeah, they definitely didn't remedy themselves in this case.
Right. This was actually found in the Department of Education's, the Office of Civil Rights.
Yep.
Resolution agreement with Brown University. And this is actually something that's been found with universities across the country, that there aren't proper reporting mechanisms and students aren't hearing back for months when they are dealing with civil rights violations. I want to talk about the support you had outside the university, because as Jewish students, that's often what we have to resort to. After this whole situation happens, who's your first phone call? You pick up the phone, you need to rant to someone. Who do you call first?
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned that. So I actually had a merged call with the director of Brown RISD Hillel and the Chabad rabbi of Chabad at Brown.
Beautiful.
And I was on the Metro North coming back from Manhattan. I live in Connecticut. And I patched them both into a call. I told them what happened. I was like, I need some help.
And what was their response?
Yeah, I mean, their response right away is, we're going to reach out to the administration and have them take a look at this. Again, in the public light, President Paxton here has been a phenomenal figure for the pro-Israel community, a big supporter. But there's some kind of gap in our universities. I could speak for Brown in particular, that that strong moral compass from our leaders hasn't really soaked down to the rest of the university.
Wow. So you mentioned that you are a religious Jew and you walk openly through campus with your kippah and tzitzis. And something that's really struck me in the last couple weeks is that Hillel International and ADL did a poll together, and they found that just under 50% of Jewish students did not feel extremely comfortable showing their identity, and 41% actively felt the need to hide their Jewish identity. And this really reflects my experience. I remember during our encampment, a lot of students were telling me, Luda, I'm starting to hide my star in my shirt when I walk through the encampment or during this encampment because I'm scared. But you didn't necessarily have that option. How did that change your experience? And walk me through what it felt like through this whole situation, being openly, proudly a religious Jew.
Yeah, I was definitely heckled while, walking through the main green, called genocidal so many countless times, flipped off, yelled at. I was told that a global Jewish genocide was imminent. Thank you for telling me that. Nice to know. But yeah, I've had crazy harassment and discrimination happen to me on a day-to-day the past year, just walking through our main green. But yeah, no physical intimidation. So I felt comfortable wearing my kippah and tzitzit. I remember my mom calling me right after October 7th, and she was like, maybe you should consider wearing a baseball hat. I was like, no, it's okay. Don't worry. And I think I told her the following. When it comes to making a Kiddush Hashem, showing that, look, here's the Jewish people, and we could deal with trouble in a productive way. I think that really trumps a lot of other things. That by me walking around campus wearing my yarmulke, my tzitzit, and not flipping out at these protesters in some non-rational way, causing more trouble, stirring the pot more. Instead, me going to the president's office last year and speaking with her, speaking with administration in, a productive, calm, cool way. I think that really accomplished a lot on my behalf and on behalf of the Jewish community at Brown, that we're not irrational, crazy people that just lash out. But I think in the sense that, proudly expressing my Judaism was a really useful tool for gaining a lot of support for the Jewish community at Brown.
Well, kol hakavod, seriously, good for you for being strong enough and to walk through campus after all that harassment, because I understand when students say they do want to hide during that time. It's not easy. How did you find the strength to keep going to class, to keep showing up? And now you've become a leader. You're the president of
Brown Students for Israel.
Brown Students for Israel. How did you find the strength to keep going and to keep being proudly Jewish?
So I'd say this instance in particular, where I felt that there was clear anti-Semitic bias against me, really inspired me and empowered me to take on these leadership roles, right? With Brown Students for Israel, I also serve as Hillel International's ILN, Israel Leadership Network, Ivy League trustee. So there was a sense of me that said, hey, look, we got to do something. And I think at this point, SJP was suspended at Brown at the end of October. And I wrote an op-ed saying that COM has returned to campus in a way that it hasn't since before October 7th, 23. And it's really been amazing to see. Yes, it feels like we're walking on thin ice still, but there's definitely been a transformation. And I think it's only because of voices like myself, like people all over the country speaking out.
Wow. Yes. So I want to dive a little bit more into this article you wrote. What prompted your campus to suspend Students for Justice in Palestine?
Yes.
And was that something you advocated for?
Yeah. In theory, before SJP's suspension, there were many of us that were advocating for their suspension, given that they believed that the people that went into Israel on October 7th, 2023 were freedom fighters. Now, it turns out they really they shot themselves in the foot, so to speak, because this committee that I was on, believe it or not, voted against the divestment proposal. The university must think that at this point, I don't care because the vote went my way and I should be happy. SJP afterwards caused a whole, they were kicking and screaming and they said racial slurs to people on the corporation, which is Brown's highest governing board. They did some crazy stuff, which ended up leading to their suspension. But, I think in my case in particular, yeah, it's nice that they voted down divestment at the end of the day, and I'm really thankful for it. But I was wronged based on my religion, my identity. And I think that's something that can't go without, it can't just go away.
Right. And when I saw that SJP was finally suspended at Brown, I saw that the rules are finally being upheld at this university, and that breaking the rules and breaking the laws, actually, we live in a society where that does have consequences.
Yeah, ironically, the official reason for SJP's suspension was actually their mistreatment of the corporation members. So it had nothing to really do with all the anti-Semitism that they were spewing for the previous year, which was ironic.
It really strikes me when you say that students were finally able to enjoy fall, because I think about how fun college was for me before October 7th and how every day after was a game of survival, walking through campus and getting through classes. And I'm so happy that you guys were able to take a deep breath and go to do in college what you came there to do after this suspension. I'm so honored to have you on this podcast and to get your story out in the open so people can hear what's going on our campuses. But I can't imagine how many students, Jewish students, were denied opportunities for jobs, for leadership positions on their campuses. And we never heard about it because it happened behind the scenes, simply for being openly Jewish, like you were. Do you think or see that this is something that's going on campuses beyond your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm happy for the opportunity that I have to speak up about this, but I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, and people, aren't as fortunate as I to be outspoken about it. And it really is unfortunate. People pay a lot of money to go to these great academic institutions, and to not be treated with with equal opportunity than other students just based on your religion or your political views is something that shouldn't exist.
So you went through something really challenging and you came out on top. You took a challenging experience, and instead of saying, I'm going to hide away, you became a leader. You have become a light to other students on your campus. And now by sharing your story, you'll be a light to so many other students around the country. What advice would you give to students who are going through anti-Semitism, or who are just feeling scared to apply for opportunities or put themselves out there because of this climate on campus that you experienced?
Yeah, campus is really scary. And for everyone on other campuses, we really have to realize that the majority of this world supports us. And that's something that we have to lean on and rely on. And for even our mental health, when everything is going down the drain on our campuses, just to remember that, this is just a fringe. This is not what life is really like. And that, to really be outspoken about this, because it would be nice if our universities were representative of the rest of our country. So it's something to think about.
Well said. You handled this so diplomatically in this conversation. The students removed you from this committee for your Jewish identity. You, in this whole story, have come off, and you have been so brave and so courageous and so strong to walk through campus and be yelled at in your yarmulke and tzitzit, to reach out to your university president and vice president after this situation and share what happened with them. But even the strongest soldiers, even the strongest of us, have moments of vulnerability and have moments of weakness. And this courage that you had, courage can only come in the face of darkness, in the face of evil. And so can you tell us about those moments of vulnerability, those moments that maybe some might even perceive as weakness or fear that you had, that allowed you to feel empowered to have this courage?
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of moments where I felt worried or scared, whether it was when I published an op-ed in our student paper, or gave a quote to a media outlet, or even wore a proud Zionist shirt, walking around our main green, holding an Israeli flag. Questions went through my head. Am I going to be doxxed? Are my professors and fellow students at my university going to yell at me? Are they going to write counterpieces to mine? What kind of negative repercussions is this going to have on the rest of my life? These are all things that occurred to me. But really the calming factor, at least for me, was realizing that we have so many allies outside of our universities. And when you're surrounded by all these people at some universities, the majority of people who are just vehemently against you and, against your identity, it's really scary. But that realization that this isn't the rest of the country, this isn't the rest of the world, this isn't the rest of my life even, university is only 4 years. That's really, that for me, that was a really reassuring factor.
So moving forward, as I said, you've come out of this bigger and stronger and better. What would you tell university administrators across the country on how they could handle situations like this differently?
Look, for college administrators, to keep on this theme, when there's an issue, something like supporting terrorists, think about any other time historically, when there's a terrorist attack, when there's terrorism in the world, people are so quick to say, hey, this is really bad. We don't stand for this. In contrast, universities really didn't have the same moral gumption to shut things down this time. And actually, they let it go for 15 months. So to the administrators, you really have to consider standing up for what's right.
You seem like a very centered person. You know who you are. And I know people like this do not come without having role models. So who is your biggest role model? Who inspires you to be the amazing Ben Marcus that we're hearing from today?
Wow. That's a pretty phenomenal question. I'd say, right, not to be cliche, but my parents have really been phenomenal role models for me in my life. Again, I've always lived in small Jewish communities, so I know what it's like to be a minority opinion. Even though I went to Jewish day school, there weren't so many more religious students. So I know what it's like to be on the outskirts of a group of people my own age or even older than me. And just seeing how my parents deal with all these situations, they really come at it from an angle of calmness, which I think is essential to have things be productive.
And what gives you hope? This could be about campus, this could be about the Jewish people overall or this conflict, but what's giving you hope right now?
Yeah. No matter how dark it gets, the Jewish people always endure. So I think at the end of the day, I know that even on the worst of my days, I know it will get better. And I think that, right, that really gives me hope. And I think for everyone else, just realizing that, we're the ones that will be able to turn this all around, especially our young generation. I think there's really something to look forward to as a generation growing up in 2025, being able to change the world, make it a better place.
So I want to ask a question that's kind of more fun for me. This podcast, as we talked about, it's called Higher Ed, spelled with the CH, which really resonates with me personally because I love the symbolism of Chai, and I love, especially post-October 7th, seeing students and members of our community wearing this symbol. What does Chai mean to you in the context of your campus experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it in the literal sense. Chai means, life, to live. And the reality is, as Jewish students on college campuses, as pro-Israel students on college campuses, we only have one option, and that is to live. So we need to fight for it.
Wow, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, and for being so honest about what happened to you. Truly, I'm so moved by what you shared today. Everything about your story, it's a true Kiddush Hashem, and it's really inspiring. I hope you keep sharing your story with Jewish students, because just hearing it myself, it's inspiring me to take on another mitzvah. It's really, really beautiful.
Snaps. Very nice.
That's it for this episode of Higher Ed. Thanks so much for listening. To learn more about how to fight anti-Semitism on your campus, go to notoleranceforantisemitism.adl.org. If you or someone else you know would like to report a campus anti-Semitism incident, text CALL HELP to 51555 or go to adl.org/call for free legal help. Shout out to my roommates for their feedback and words of encouragement, and for putting up with a makeshift podcast studio that took over our living room this week. This episode would not have been possible without their patience and support. Subscribe today for weekly conversations and stories about Jewish campus life. Please rate and review us, and if you have an experience to share, email us at highered@adl.org. That's CHAIERED@adl.org. We look forward to hearing your stories. I'm your host, Luda Saharov, and this is Higher Ed.